Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei was Angel of the Abyss? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Rahab gulped and walked forward, opening the door with a heavy heart. As soon as he entered, he faced a fallen angel and dragon hybrid. He was blindfolded with fangs in his mouth and the upper body of a fallen angel, while the lower body was that of an Asian dragon. The creature was crucified on a large cross with nails driven through his body as his blindfolded eyes leaked tears of blood. Rahab meekly spoke as he sensed feeling of pain, suffering, resentment radiated from the creature. Samuel, what has become of you? The creature swiveled his head, he best he could, to find the source of his voice, and growled, you've got some guts coming in here, angel, and to bring a dragon with you. Rahab fell to his knees and said in a broken voice, Samuel, brother. Rahab hesitantly got up as he removed the blindfold with a stinging pain. He pleaded, Samuel, open your eyes, please. As Samuel opened his slitted eyes, he saw Angel wearing a armor that he hadn't seen for decades before he was locked up here, he said quietly as the negative feelings started disappearing. Rahab. How? Why do I sense dragon essence from you? Rahab lowered his head. I was summoned out. Samuel looked around frantically, remembering his punishment. Where's father? Rahab. You shouldn't be here, he'll punish you again. Rahab said with a heavy heart, his voice cracking. He died sealing Terhixa. Samuel looked at him with a hard glare which Rahab didn't dare see as he cried tears of his blood. Once the news sank in, Samuel's body went limp and he asked in a broken voice as his own tears overflowed, why are you here, Rahab? Rahab shook his head. I wanted to meet you and, if you allowed, set you free in a sacred gear. Samuel looked at him and asked, what happened to your heart? Rahab's voice hitched. My heart couldn't take the load of the news, the daughter of Dad saved me. Samuel had an inkling of what he was talking about and said sadly, I see. Rahab looked at him with a request, please brother, let me set you free. Samuel nodded a bit hesitant. Let my holy leather restraints remain in the sacred gear. And only give me to the purest of heart. Rahab nodded as he started the ritual. Once he had completed it, he set the dark metal bracelets in a conjured box, then stayed in the room for a few more minutes, then teleported to the meeting place Azazil, and he usually frequented, and sent Azazil a message. By the time Azazil appeared, he had wiped his tears and was sitting on the bench overlooking the beach. Azazil came and sat down. How was your meeting? Rahab looked at him with a smile. It was nice. Lady Lilith helped. Azazil nodded happily and asked, so what happened? Rahab looked at him with a slight concern evident and asked, you're good with sacred gears, right? Azazil smirked and said, not me brag, but I'm the best. Rahab set the box in his lap and said hesitantly, just don't say anything to anyone and check it. When Azazil opened the box and looked at the two matching bracelets, he raised his eyebrows. This is new. How come I've never seen this one? Rahab carefully said, it was created today. Azazil looked at him in shock, then back at the bracelets and touched them. As soon as he touched them, he appeared before Samuel sleeping in a field of grass. He willed himself out, scared of what he saw, and looked at Rahab in horror. He got up and took a few steps back and said with fear for his friend, Rahab, open your wings. Rahab opened his wings to show that there were no black feathers in the wings. Azazil hugged him and said, you're too foolish for your own good sometimes. As Azazil calmed down and they both sat, Azazil said, sighing, you scared me to death. Even if Samuel is my brother, he would not have liked me visiting his gear if he were awake. Rahab nodded and said, I'm sorry. Otherwise, how is it? Azazil looked over them again, this time making them float. After a few minutes he nodded, it's good. Its design is also a bit different than how God's sacred gears were made, so it reacts differently to my energy. I am unsure if the draconic gears would damage it as Samuel is sealed in it. What are your plans for it? Rahab looked at him once, then sighed, I'll keep it safe. And if I find a human pure enough for mine and Samuel's liking, I'll offer them this. Azazil chuckled, that cuts down the herd by a lot. But until then? Rahab said with decisiveness, I'll keep it safe in the abyss. Azazil nodded and got up. Very well. But if you do choose a human, can I watch his progress? Rahab nodded, I'll come by personally when it happens. Till then, give my regards to Penemu and the others. Azazil gave a wave and disappeared in a magic circle. Rahab sat a few minutes more, then teleported to his personal abyss to store the artifact, as he had decided against storing it near the daughter of Dad. At the same day, Rias Gremory and Sona Citri were standing outside the Mayu's chamber. Rias knew exactly why they were here, well, Sona had figured out due to Rias' unease and the things she had observed, and truthfully her opinion about this were clearly visible due to the glares that she was giving Rias. After nearly an hour, an assistant came and said, Lord Asmodeus will see you now, Sona-sama. Rias did not take much from the name, but in Sona's mind alarm bells were ringing. Sona sighed, knowing fully well that Rias had somehow done something big, whether it was something good or bad, it remained to be seen, but Sona was inclined towards bad. She sighed and straightened her dress and was led to a room which mimicked a police interrogation unit. She sat down for a few minutes, noticing that the room was relatively cold. Falbium Asmodeus entered with a glass of water, a file, a notebook, and a pen. He put the glass of water on the table and slid it towards her and sat down after she gave a bow. Falbium took in her posture for a few seconds and said, "Do you know why you were called in?" Sona nodded. "I have an inkling, Lord Asmodeus." Falbium nodded her to continue. She took a sip and spoke. "I believe it concerns with the angel who has entered the school recently, or it has to do with Ria's failed attempt at getting a bishop." Asmodeus stared at her for a second, then spoke. "It has to do with both. Firstly, I want to ask why there has been a shortage of reports from you. We had agreed upon 15 reports per month from each of you. We only got 10 from you." Sona furrowed her eyes. "I'm sorry, what?" Asmodeus looked at her surprise and said, "Do you happen to have copies of your latest reports?" Sona took out her phone and opened the gallery to show the photographs of the reports. As Asmodeus took a few moments connecting the phone to the projector and read through the reports, he narrowed his eyes to find that the missing reports were addressing the new pawn that the Grimoire had acquired. He narrowed his eyes to find that this was a week before the incident and it already had a fallen angel mentioned. Asmodeus looked at Sona and nodded. "It is good that you had these copies and very well written reports. Now who sends the reports?" Sona narrowed her eyes. "Ria's Grimoire's peerage." "Are you saying she withheld my reports?" Asmodeus sat back. "I never said that. I just find it highly surprising that these reports never made it to us." Sona narrowed her eyes. "So, you weren't the one giving all clear to us, after all." Asmodeus narrowed his eyes. "You got a message from us?" Sona narrowed her eyes as she took her phone and scrolled through her calendar and gave it to him. "You were Lucifer Sama, didn't call it this time." Asmodeus looked at the time and looked through his own calendar, then switched off the recorder. "What I'm about to say doesn't leave this room." When Sona nodded, he continued, "At that time, we had a classified military drill." He then switched on the recorder. "As I said, it wouldn't be possible for him to call." Sona's anger and pride were at her fingertips. "Very well, Lord Asmodeus." Asmodeus looked at her for a second and motioned her to drink some more. When she did, he continued, moving on. "Why wasn't a direct call to us when Rias was going to storm a church?" Sona sighed bitterly. "I was made aware after the fiasco had ended and the angel was already in the school." Asmodeus nodded, a bit miffed at the misinformation that Rias was providing Sona. As Asmodeus was to continue, Ajuka entered. Sona bowed again. "Lord Beelzebub." Ajuka nodded back and motioned Falbium to cut the recorder. As the recorder was cut, he asked, "Miss Citri, have you ever used the subjugation spell in the evil pieces?" Sona gave a baffled look and said, "I'm sorry, Lord Beelzebub, but are you saying the Citri clan can't control their servants?" As Ajuka held his hands in surrender, Falbium asked, "Yes or no?" Sona said, "Miff, no, and I don't plan on using it ever." Falbium looked at Ajuka and said, "What was this about?" Ajuka said with a dreadful yet thoughtful face, "Rahab, the unfell angel, knew of the subjugation spell in the pieces, which only appears when someone uses it. And if Sona didn't use it." Falbium looked at Sona and said, "I'm not blaming Rias currently, but if she is guilty." Sona nodded. "I'd like to contact my parents." Falbium put the notebook and the pen in front of her. "Your statement." Sona took a few minutes writing it, then gave it back. Asmodeus nodded. "Very well, someone will show you to your sister and call your parents." Sona walked out and moved forward towards Seraphal's office. She was sure if there wasn't a magic inhibitor in the building, he would have frozen Atlas to floor. As she reached the door and knocked, Seraphal opened the door and hugged her after noticing her. "Oh, my little sister is here. Asmodeus didn't scold you, right? I'll hit him if he hurt you." Sona for the first time didn't say anything till Seraphal left the hug, noticing her muteness. Seraphal asked, worried, "Come inside and tell me what happened." As soon as Sona came inside, the floor started to freeze around her. Seraphal closed the door and looked at her in worry. She had not lost control of her magic fully, but was starting to freeze the floor, a power that she wasn't supposed to have. Sona looked at her and said in a calmness that Seraphal hadn't heard before, "Sister, could you call our parents? Preferably before I lose control and go kill Rias." Seraphal gave a wary look and nodded and went to her table to call. After a few minutes, his parents arrived in a magic circle to find Seraphal standing a few feet away from Sona and the ground around Sona freezing. Lady Citri looked a bit scared at how Sona was behaving, while Lord Citri was gauging the power and seeing that it was hurting his daughter. Lady Citri asked, "What happened, Sona?" Sona said coldly, "Please wait for sister to set up a projector." When Seraphal did, she asked, "Sister, how many reports did you receive last month?" Seraphal's eyes widened. "A10, so that's what Falbium wanted to ask." Seraphal connected her phone and said, "Stop me when you haven't seen the report." When Seraphal stopped and they read the report, Seraphal was apoplectic and said angrily, "We never got this, we'd have sent someone to help." Sona looked at her parents, a bit anger. "A parent who sends our reports?" Lady Citri replied, "Grimoires pass it on." "Sona, are you saying?" Sona looked decisive. "Atlas, that's what was insinuated." "Now when were you on this date and time when Ria supposedly called you?" She pointed out on her projected calendar. Seraphile's eyes widened at the date and time, and she was about to reply when Sona said on a military drill. Seraphile just shook her head in affirmative and looked down, anger bubbling up in her. Lord Citri asked to lighten up the mood. And how was your chess match with the angel? Sona froze for a second and said, how do you know about it? Lord Citri smirked. Your chessboard is always being watched, or did you forget? Seraphile asked curiously. What about it? Lord Citri replied, just dodging a pillow to the face Sona lost. Lady Citri and Seraphile looked at Sona's reddened face in disbelief. Rias was sitting alone in the visitor area now, which Sona had left half an hour ago. She thought to herself how her plan to get a strong peerage had gone downhill. Mostly she understood it was her own fault, her own greed that led to her being here. Her peerage was back at the school, so there was no one to comfort her, not today. When she saw Sona leave the room, she was honestly scared of what had been told to her and what she had said for her to be that stiff when she had left the room. A few minutes later, an attendant took her to a similar interrogation room and she felt the temperature decrease. She knew due to the various anime and series she watched that the temperature was lowered for the suspect to feel uncomfortable. Knowing this didn't help her, only made her feel worse. After a few minutes, Ajuka entered with a notebook and pen, seeing whom Rias relaxed a bit. Surely her brother's best friend would help her, but as soon as Falbium entered looking royally pissed, carrying a file and a glass of water, her hopes were destroyed. She slightly bowed to them both, resulting in Falbium sitting down opposite her and slid her the glass of water. Asmodeus looked at her and said, may I ask where your pawn pieces are? Ajuka found a bug in the system that showed any pawn pieces used in the last month were exploding, killing the person that was resurrected and people surrounding them. Ria's eyes widened as she thought of Issei and her peerage, her eyes teared up as she broke down, I used them to resurrect a boy. Asmodeus narrowed his eyes. When was this? Ria slowly said 3 to 4 weeks ago. His name is Issei. Hyoudou. Ajuka nodded to Falbium. Sona's reports check out. Rias let a boy be killed, then resurrected him. Rias froze at Ajuka's statement. How? Ajuka gave her a glare. Moving on to your attack on the church. Why did you feel it to be not important to tell your fellow governor that you were essentially declaring war? Rias stayed quiet and looked down, then said meekly she would have called her sister. Falbium. Asmodeus was usually calm person, but this is what pissed him off, disobedient soldiers. Asmodeus stood up angrily, making the chair fall, and began pacing back and forth and nearly shouted, well, congrats for starting another fucking war. If it was any other angel that had come. Rias lowered her head in shame. Ajuka interrupted, and what about yours usage of the subjugation spell? Who did you use it on and what did you tell? Don't bother lying, we can see the effects on the pieces quite clearly. Rias nodded. Akeno Himejima. I told her that her father abandoned her. And Hyoudou Kiba to make him more loyal. Ajuka's and Falbium's eyes widened in surprise and dread, resulting in Falbium giving a dry chuckle to Ajuka. Either I'm throwing her to the angels or the fallen angels will kill us when they find out about this. Ajuka put down the notebook and said, I'm going to the human world to remove them. Barakiel is either going to hunt us down or Azazil will, and I don't know which is worse. Then I am going to reprogram each and every one of the pieces. I'll send Seraphile in if she's calm enough. Falbium looked at Rias for a bit, then said, you know that there is an angel in your school, right? When Rias nodded, her spirit broken, he continued, he was a member of the original fallen angels. The same angels who were the first to fall. Currently he is the only unfell angel in existence and a member of pure angel council. So if he finds out that you're the reason that one of his brothers has been suffering because of what you did, I don't see how this is going to end well. The next day, Rahab, who was currently teaching the third-year class, was surprised to find a lack of both Rias and Sona for a second day, and a present Akeno who was surprisingly calm on seeing him. Usually she was staring at him with contempt and anger, now which was replaced confusion and sadness. As he let the class go, he said, Akeno-san, please stay, I need to ask a few questions. Akeno stayed, her usual fake smile not present. She sat on her seat packing what remained outside. When people had left, he asked, are the Masses sisters alright? I've been told it is unlike them to miss classes. Akeno nodded. They were called back for something. Rahab seemed unsure. Are you alright? You seem different. Akeno put up a smile. Ara, is the angel worried about me? Rahab just nodded, not really getting the innuendo. Akeno said with a bit of sadness and underlying anger, when you find out that your best friend forced you to believe that your father abandoned you, it changes things. I don't even know if he would want to see me now. She ended in a sad tone. Rahab patted her head. What was his name? Maybe I could find him. Akeno looked hesitant for a few moments, then said Barakiel. Rahab froze on hearing the name and said, don't move. Stay here. Rahab took out his phone and called his friend. When the phone connected, he spoke. Hey Barakiel, are you busy? Akeno froze and took a step back. Rahab continued, alright, meet me outside Kuo Academy in 5 minutes. Rahab looked at Akeno, who was frozen in terror, and said, let's go. He's been searching for you, and here you were. We'll surprise him. Akeno shook her head as tears threatened to overflow. Why? Rahab patted her head. I won't let my friend stay upset. He has gave me many gifts when we were little, it's my turn. Akeno nodded as she followed. As they got out of the classroom, a few students followed, wondering why Akeno was crying. As they went, a few more people joined. Rahab told Akeno to stay inside the gate. Stay here, I'll bring him in. Rahab got out to see the man wearing a sharp business suit. Hey Barak. Glad you could come. Barakiel looked at him with a slight glare. Cadmus, why have you called me here? Rahab put an arm on his shoulder and said, come in, first. As Barakiel entered, he froze on seeing Akeno standing there, tears dripping down her face. She muttered softly, Father, you came. Barakiel punched Cadmus in the side slightly as he went and hugged Akeno. Akeno, I thought. The students who were spying cheered at the reunion, but were shooed away by Rahab. As Barakiel ended the hug, he looked at Rahab and said, I can't decide if I should kill you or hug you. Rahab chuckled, I'll take the hug, brother. Barakiel hugged him with some tears. Idiot. Rahab chuckled, come to my home today, I'll bring Akeno. I'll tell Shem what's up so you could have some time. Barakiel nodded, standing beside Akeno. As Rahab took out his phone, he said, what are you standing here for? Take her to lunch. Barakiel gave him a look but smiled, looking at a relieved Akeno. As Barakiel left with Akeno in tow, Rahab dialed Shem's number. Hey Shem, are you free for a few minutes? Yeah, was just going to an outpost to check on things. What's up? I found Barakiel's daughter. Could you give him a night off, they could spend some time. Huh. That's good. Alright, I'll arrange for someone to take care of his post. How did you find her? She was in the Grimory's peerage. But something she said left a sour taste in my mouth. What is it? She said when you find out that your best friend forced you to believe that your father abandoned you, it changes things. I didn't quite get it, but if my hunch is right, Barakiel could very well attack the devils. I'll see into this. What's your thoughts on this? A subjugation spell. I hope it isn't it, but if it is, me and you will have to have words with the creator of these pieces. Shem's eye sighed as he cut the call. If it was it, Barakiel could very well start a war. Rahab on the other hand went inside thinking what could have made Rias use the spell. It was best to cover every base. As the break ended, he went to teach the second-year class. As he entered, he noticed a huge increase in negative feelings originating from Kiba, who was barely keeping a straight face. Rahab sighed, it was going to be a long day, and he just had to come to a hotspot of crazy. With a dry chuckle, he started his class. As the school ended, he sent Asia to take Akeno to their home. He wandered around and waited for Kiba to leave. When all the students had left, Kiba came out of the building. Didn't expect an angel to wait for me. Rahab winced at the concentrated rage the boy held and said, knowing fully well how such people could be gotten through, courtesy of Azazil, could I interest you in a spar? Kiba raised an eyebrow. He knew he didn't have a chance against him, but whatever, at least there would be a live target. He nodded. Rahab said, unsure, we'll go to the forest clearing. Follow me. As they rose up with their wings, Kiba noticed the distinctive infinity symbol on his second-to-top set, and when the curiosity got the better of him, he asked what's up with the symbol. Rahab smiled. At least the boy was talking. It marks me as the son of the daughter of Dad. Kiba looked at him as if he said something stupid. You weren't created by God. Rahab chuckled, then said sadly, I was. But something happened that made my heart deteriorate due to shock. The daughter of Dad claimed me as a son when she made my heart like hers. As Kiba nodded, Rahab asked, what happened to you to turn out like this? Kiba sneered, if you want to talk to me about why I chose to be a devil. Rahab cut him off. I'm asking, why do you contain such resentment, rage and grief? Kiba blinked a bit, then said angrily, you would already know, wouldn't you? I'm the only survivor of the Holy Sword Project. Rahab blinked and asked in a sad manner, please tell me. The Seraph haven't told me all that has happened. Only what I needed to know. Gabriel said they hadn't told me some of the hard stuff. Kiba noticed he really didn't know and said the Holy Sword Project was a barbaric project done by the church to make it possible for normal humans to wield holy swords. In the end, all but me were killed, and the sad thing is we all believed it was for God. And yesterday I found out that Rias had used a subjugation spell on me, so I'm sorry if I'm pissed off. Rahab winced at his rudeness, but nodded, then suddenly stopped when he saw a few hundred spirit looming over Kiba. Kiba stopped, wondering what the Seraph had seen that made him teary. Rahab began to speak. Wizo Vasi Polo. Wizos Asila Polo Sil Nimol, who are you? Why aren't you in heaven? He heard a reply, his friends. We won't leave till he drops his revenge and lives for all of us. Rahab wiped his tears and said, they're all around you. Following you. Telling you to live. They won't enter heaven till you don't let go. Kiba stared at him as if he had said something he didn't want to accept. Rahab came near him and touched his shoulder to let him see what he saw. After a few minutes of conversation, Kiba's anger slowly subsided, but a little remained. But a little anger was good, it would help Kiba, so Rahab removed his hand from his shoulder. Well, Kiba said, nearly begging, just a few more minutes please. Rahab ruffled his hair, let the dead pass on Kiba. They have been here long enough. Kiba's shoulders slouched, but he nodded. After floating for a few minutes, Rahab asked, should we postpone our spar? Kiba nodded, still a bit down. Rahab patted his head. Smile, Kiba, for all the children that demanded you to live. Smile like you mean it for once, not because you have to show it. Kiba tried to smile, but it was awkward one. Rahab smiled at him and said, get some sleep, you still have class tomorrow. Kiba grinned and waved a bye as he left. Rahab continued towards his home. He landed a short distance away and spotted Barakiel, who spotted him and waited. Barakiel shot him a look and said threateningly, did you know Rias used a subjugation spell on Akeno? Rahab shook his head. Didn't until a few minutes ago. She apparently also used the same spell on another boy. As lightning passed through Barakiel's fingertips, Rahab took a few steps back. Barakiel, brother. Calm down. Issei and me are going to talk with the creator of the pieces. Barakiel formed a lightning bolt in his hand. All these years, Rahab, all these years, I thought she hated me. All because some devil wanted her in her peerage. I swear, I kill her myself. Rahab took a few more steps back. He had never liked the anger that was allowed in the fallen. He had seen all of the Watchers' avenging form, and he had no will of seeing them in their wrath form that was open to them when they fell. Rahab said, pleading, please brother, just listen. You don't have to restart the war. We'll work something out. Barakiel moved towards him. Tell me brother, why did she have to suffer? Rahab took flight and went towards the forests. He had to make sure the bystanders would be alright. They didn't need to face Barakiel's wrath. Barakiel appeared in a flash of lightning and asked, this time forcefully, why did she have to suffer, Rahab? Stop running and answer me. As Barakiel let loose his lightning bolt, Rahab's wings moved to cover him on instinct as he donned on his armor. As the lightning hit the feathered dome, Rahab winced in pain, and his wings receded to allow the lightning to pass through to graze the side of his stomach. Rahab's instincts overcame him, and a few dozen light spears appeared around him, revolving around him as a wall. When another bolt approached, 2 light spears took the blow, and the rest were launched towards Barakiel. As Barakiel expertly dodged the spears and let loose a lightning from the sky that hit Rahab in the back due to him trying to dodge. He opened a small abyss rift and conjured a shield of darkness over himself, which reflected the lightning onto Barakiel. As Barakiel was pushing him back into a corner, Rahab led him away from civilization and over the open sea in an hour. Truthfully, he didn't want to attack. His powers over the abyss scared him when he was only a 4 set, as a 5 said he didn't even want to try. As the attack stopped, he dropped his guard only to be hit with a lightning sword in his stomach. As he stumbled back, blood leaking from his mouth, Barakiel realized what he had done. Michael, along with Raphael and Gabriel, descended from the heavens, feeling the tremor in the belief system. Gabriel quickly caught Rahab and began healing him after giving Barakiel an unhappy glance. Michael lifted his sword to end Barakiel, only to be stopped by Rahab, who weakly said, Don't me. Michael, it's not worth restarting the war. Michael hesitantly lowered his sword as he said, Raphael, bring Asia back please, we'll take Rahab to the medics till then. Raphael nodded and flew at a fast speed towards Asia's location, after giving Barakiel a disappointed look. Michael looked at Barakiel and said, his avenging form in full display, know this Barakiel, only Rahab has saved your life. I have no qualms about ending you right where you stand, because you've attacked an angel today. Barakiel landed on a nearby island after they left, clutching his head. What did he just do? He attacked his own brother out of rage for something he had no control over. His wings surrounded him in a dome as he cried. After an hour, he took out his phone to see Akeno had messaged him, saying he should calm himself down before meeting her again. And another from Issei which just said, return. We have to talk. As he teleported back and entered the council room, he was hit in the face with a solid punch by Azazil. What the hell did you do? You stabbed him in the stomach. For what? Barakiel kept his head down. He knew he had it coming. He had injured the youngest of them. He muttered, ashamed. I was angry. Azazil slapped him. You know what you could have done? He was mindful enough to put some distance between your daughter and you. You could have killed her if it wasn't for him. For so many years you looked, this is what would have happened to her. Barakiel kept his head down. Azazil was held back by Issei and made to sit. Azazil drank the glass of water and then threw it down in anger. As the metal clanged, Issei said, I'm giving you a week's leave. Get your head straight and return. Barakiel nodded with his head down and muttered, I'm sorry. Azazil yelled, say sorry to the person lying in the heavens hospital, not us. Barakiel left the room without another word. In the underworld, Falbium Asmodeus was furious. He swiped everything off of his table in anger. Barakiel had attacked the unfell angel in anger. If it hadn't been for the angel's unwillingness to fight, this could have meant war straight away, seeing as how Michael was in his avenging form. He walked to the interrogation room when Rias was being held and opened the room to see the Gremory family comforting her. As he opened the door, everyone's eyes were on him. As Serziches was about to speak, he yelled out, Serziches. I don't have the patience or the time to deal with you. Serziches shut up instantly, knowing fully well awake Falbium always meant trouble. As Serziches led the Gremory family to the observation room, Falbium kicked his chair with such a force that it impacted the side wall to form a dent. Rias, who was already scared of the man, was currently downright terrified. He put the recently taken photos in front of her and said harshly, well, congratulations on starting a war. As she looked at the photo, she saw the angel at her school being stabbed by a fallen angel. Asmodeus continued, and if you're wondering who the fallen angel is, it's your queen's father. He was so angry that he lashed out on the first supernatural he saw after his daughter told him of your subjugation spell. He put the image of Michael midway of raising his sword in front of her and said, give thanks to whoever you like, because that unfell saved your life again, because he stopped Michael from executing the fallen. As Urziches and his family heard what had happened, they lowered their heads in sadness and embarrassment. Falbium left the room, shutting the door with a loud bang after saying, sister of Surziches or not, either you forfeit your life like a soldier or issue an apology to the Grigori Council and the pure seraphs. I want your answer by tomorrow morning. Lord Gremory looked down in sadness, while Lady Gremory was staring at her crying daughter in apparent anger. Before any of them could move to comfort Rias, Lady Gremory moved to the door and said with her anger in full display, I'm going home, Surziches. Call me when Rias decides to take her punishment, because it will not be the end of it. As Urziches went outside to stop his mother from leaving after a few seconds to take it in, he found her bowing to Lord and Lady Citri. I ask you to forgive my daughter's mistakes if you can. Surzich's breath hitched when he saw Lady Citri wiping his mother's tears and saying we can forgive her in time, but Sona has decided to stay separately for some time. She was not able to handle the breach of the unquestioned trust she had in Rias. Lady Gremory nodded and left. Surziches caught Seraphal's disappointed look as she took her parents away before they could notice him. A few hours later, the temperature of the whole building dropped as Lady Lilith entered the building. Everyone stood up, but she walked straight to Falbium Asmodeus's room and knocked. When there was a sound of come in, she entered in all her glory, her hands now free, freezing the floor that she stepped on. Falbium rose from his seat and bowed deeply. Lady Lilith. Lilith looked at him piercingly, then at the things he had thrown around in anger. Falbium didn't look up for the fear of his death. She chillingly asked, where is the perpetrator? Seraphal entered the room. Falbi. Lady Lilith, she bowed, knowing fully well that the person in front of her could kill her at a moment's notice. She asked again, this will be the last time, Falbium. Where is the person responsible for this fiasco? Falbium said, trying not to look into her eyes. This way, my lady. Seraphal got out of their way as they passed and followed. As Falbium went towards the interrogation room, he found Grafia standing outside with a stern face, who kneeled as soon as she spotted Lilith. Lilith gave her a glance and said, what is your relation with the perpetrator? Grafia replied, fear evident in her voice, sister-in-law, my lady. Lilith said in disappointment, you're to return to Lucifuge Castle tomorrow morning to explain everything. Grafia gave a stiffened nod. Lilith motioned Falbium to open the door. When he did, he found Rias in a terrible state and Surziches standing in the corner with a resigned look as Lord Gremory consoled her. As the coldness in the air increased, the three looked at the grim face that Falbium was giving and the cold face that Surziches hoped he would never see again. He got on one knee along with Lord Gremory, while Rias bowed. Lilith asked with decisiveness, where is the fourth Mau? Falbium replied, working to remove the subjugation spell since yesterday. Lilith nodded, good, send him some manpower and give him support. I want his report in the afternoon. Falbium nodded and left. She asked, where is the mother? Surziches replied weakly, she left a few hours back. Lilith nodded, very well. Grafia, bring her with you tomorrow. Grafia replied stiffly, very well, my lady. Lilith asked Surziches, where's the co-governor? Surziches. Seraphal replied, she's at Citri Mansion. Her powers flared. Lilith gave her a sideways glance. I asked Surziches. Seraphal. Only reply when someone asks you. Seraphal bowed her head in embarrassment, apologizes, my lady. Lilith nodded, she's to report to me in the afternoon. Seraphal. Seraphal nodded, of course, my lady. She locked onto a terrified Rias and said, leave us. As everyone left, she sat down on the chair after sparing a glance at the broken one and the dent on the wall. She looked at the seated Rias and said coldly, did I tell you to sit? Rias got up at once, her legs wobbly, and shook her head. Lilith asked, now introduce yourself. Rias said hesitantly, Rias Gremory, heir of the Gremory, one of the 72 pillars. Lilith sneered, your title as heir was left outside this room. Currently you are Rias Gremory, suspected of trying to start a great war. Rias nodded with tears in her eyes. Lilith narrowed her eyes, stand straight. Act like a proper woman. Rias tried, but hours of sitting down had left her legs wobbly and she had to use support of the table. Lilith said, weak. I should end your life right here. As Rias stiffened and her eyes moistened, Lilith continued, do you realize why your mother isn't here? When Rias shook her head, she said, she has lost hope in you. Why do you think your brother was standing to the side? It's because what you did will impact him, that he well enough give away his position. As Rias started crying, Lilith asked with finality, you tell me the reason for what you did, or I'm ending your life, right here. As she said this she froze the door and got up. Now answer. 5 Rias said terrified. 4, I can't. 3, I didn't want to. 2, I didn't want to marry. 1, I swear that's it. Lilith looked at her for a second then said coldly, melting the door. Tch, I expected something. This is your reason. Lilith opened the door to find Surzich's with labored breathing. She looked at his posture and said harshly, move aside or stand strong like a Lucifer should. Have her and her fiancé present tomorrow evening at Lucifuge Castle. And send out the apology within the hour. If there is one more fight due to this incident, consider your sister's life forfeit. Ajuka Beelzebub was working on the master set of the evil pieces when there was a knock on the door. He sighed and opened it to find Falbium standing outside with a grim face. Ajuka fearfully asked, did the war start? Falbium handed him the file and closed the door behind them. As Ajuka read, he sighed in relief and asked, what's got you so stiff? Falbium dropped in a chair and said, Lady Lilith came. Ajuka's eyes were focused on Falbium. Continue. Falbium shivered. She took the complete reins. Rias is currently apologizing to the Council of Grigori. After that the pure seraphs. Lady Lilith wants your report in the afternoon. Ajuka nodded, dreading the meeting. Leave me if you would, Falbium, it's better I finish this as soon as I can. Falbium sat down. I'll sleep here, if you would allow. Going back to my house is too much hassle. Ajuka pointed to an empty table in his workshop. Take it if you want. How's Surzich is holding up? Falbium laid down on the table, not caring of the look that Ajuka gave, and said, I've not been keeping up with him, but he looked destroyed. And if things go like I fear they will, Lady Lilith will only let him go with a major slap on the wrist. Rias practically dropped his reputation, and if he doesn't learn to stay away, I'm afraid he'll be let free of his responsibilities. Ajuka grimaced on hearing the fate of his best friend, but nodded resigned. He prayed for the best his brother in arms would be able to get. In heaven, Metatron was sitting beside Rahab, who was said to be waking up in a few minutes. The scribe of God had been untrusting of Rahab for his first year. He wondered why God had not told him anything about this phenomenon they were calling unfall. For months he had immersed himself in his library, wondering about it, but he only started trusting Rahab when one thing became apparent to him. God had wiped Rahab's name from the mortal memory. True, some angels were never given a name, but chose them for introduction to humans. Rahab, however, was wiped from memory. He was saddened by the fact that the legend of the first fall didn't mention his name. It was printed as if the youngest of the Watchers never fell. Metatron had tried helping him adjust to this new age, but he had often found him lost into his thoughts and asking for forgiveness for even the tiniest of mistakes. Michael and Raphael had gotten into the habit of helping him, but Metatron had shifted his focus when he first saw him tinkering with a small abyssal ball of energy. Metatron was intrigued by such obscure power, but drew a clear conclusion that Rahab was scared of what he could do with his power, else why would he have not used his powers to his fullest to protect himself more? As Rahab woke up and began to sit up, Metatron pushed him back down. Lay down for now, Rahab. Rahab grudgingly nodded and said, Metatron, tell me Michael didn't kill Barakiel, please. Metatron sighed. Michael didn't. Don't worry. Rahab took a sigh of relief and tried to touch where he was stabbed, only for his hand to be stopped by Metatron. Don't. It's still healing. Asia Argento did all she could. Holy lightning has an effect, you need some rest. Rahab said weakly. I see. Metatron asked with some authority in his voice, why didn't you attack? Rahab looked away. The abyss isn't something that should be used, Metatron said in a tone as if it was a fact. You were afraid of using your powers. Rahab nodded. My power scared me when I was just a 4-set throne. You think I would dare use it on a friend when I'm a 5-set angel? Metatron sighed as he leaned back in his chair. He then got up after a second and said, walking to the exit, I'll see to it that your armor is repaired. Knowing you, you would rather not have a new one. Rahab smiled. Thank you, Metatron opened the door and said, try to practice your powers. You shouldn't fear your own domain. Rahab nodded mutely, knowing the answer he did not want to admit. Lilith was currently waiting in her old office for Graphia and Venelana Gremory to arrive. She was pissed off hearing what a devil's behavior had caused. One of the few people that she still held dear was hurt, and only a day after he had met her after so long. In her mind, she had wanted to see the fallen angel punished too, but she was sure Azazil would have taken care of it. As there was a knock on the door, he sipped her tea and said, Belle, who is it? Arabella replied from the other side, Miss Graphia and Mrs. Gremory have arrived, my lady. Lilith straightened up and said, bring them in. As the door opened, Belle entered, followed by Venelana and Graphia. Belle bowed and stood to the side. Graphia bowed with Venelana and said, I have returned on your command and brought Lady Gremory with me, my lady. Lilith said, slipping in her cold tone, very well. As you have returned, you will act as a Lucifuge, first, the wife of Amayu, second. Am I understood? Graphia said a bit hesitantly, as you say, my lady. As Lilith gave a nod, Belle said, you may raise your heads, Miss Lucifuge, Mrs. Gremory. Graphia lifted her head and stepped back. Venelana stayed in the bow and said once she knew Lilith's eyes were on her, I deeply apologize for the shame my daughter has brought upon the name of Lucifer and the devil kind, Lady Lilith. Lilith looked at her as if trying to figure her out, but once she was sure he said you're in no position to apologize, Venelana, for nothing wrong was done by you. I will only accept such an apology when your child apologizes to me. And only if it wasn't forced by her parents. Venelana stiffened but nodded. As she took a step back, Lilith continued, sharply the reason you were called was not because I wanted you to apologize, but to convince you to not kill your own child in rage. As Graphia stiffly turned to look at Venelana, she noticed her clenched fists and gritting teeth. Venelana replied sharply you would know, wouldn't you? As Lilith looked at her rebuttal the temperature of the room dropped considerably, and she replied wouldn't it? After all I'm picking the burden of my child's doing for so long. If only my own child could have turned out like my adopted child. As she ended Venelana looked down I apologize for my behavior, my lady. Lilith waved her off I'd like you to stay here till Rias is in the underworld. Venelana looked at her then nodded as you say, my lady. Lilith motioned her to a seat where she sat with a bit of hesitation, then Lilith looked at a nervous Graphia now child, I suggest you start your report. Graphia nodded may I use the projector, my lady. Lilith motioned Belle to close the curtains and bring the projector, which she did as fast as she could. Once it was done, Lilith called Belle over and told her to go to her room to take her morning medications, for which she nodded after giving a small smile. Lilith returned it and then turned to a fidgeting Graphia you may start. Graphia opened the missing reports and started Sona and Rias were called back to the underworld due to Rias informing me that there was a cherubim in the school. When I arrived I found a person added to her peerage, assuming that the boy was a recent addition and was to be added in the next report. I waited for the unknown cherub. When he arrived I asked what the church had wanted, to which he clearly denied affiliation with and identified himself as the last pope's killer and the unfell angel, Rahab. When asked his intentions, he replied that he had wanted to see the devils up close to find a viewpoint on them, and since according to him, Kuo was unprotected devil territory, he had chosen to come there. When asked to clarify he stated that the recently added boy was converted to a devil well over a week ago and the presence of a Class A Rouge exorcist and fallen angels. When I thanked him for the information, he unknowingly also told about how the Rias peerage had stormed a church to save the ex-holy maiden. I returned soon after and informed the mass when Lord Ajuka pointed out that the unfell angel was previously an angel of death and could have rendered the evil pieces useless if he wanted. After that as there was a constraint of time involved the mass agreed on letting him meet you as he had been requesting for a few years while being rejected by the council. Lilith looked at her with slight anger evident and said inform the council that if they plan on playing with the lives of the other devils I will play with theirs. Graphia nodded frantically at not be at her lady's wrath. Lilith nodded continue. Graphia took a breath and continued the same day as the visit was scheduled. Rias and Sona were recalled to be interrogated by Lord Asmodeus, who was in a bad mood due to finding discrepancies in the reports. Sona was called first as 5 of her 15 reports were missing. When asked about this, she seemed surprised, and Lord Asmodeus asked for any copies as Seraph usually make them for safekeeping. His hunch turned to be true as the photos of the reports were saved and presented. Lilith stopped her and read through the 5 reports. And said a bit lightly continue. Graphia nodded and told her of the events that followed. By the end, Lilith was seething in anger at the danger Rias had caused for them all. Then asked remembering what Seraph said what of Sona's flare in power. Graphia looked down Sona's power flared due to her pride and trust being trampled upon by Rias. Seraph said that Sona will have to learn to control her new power to some extent that is like her own before she'll be able to continue her duties in Kuo if you see fit. Lilith nodded ignoring her slip of tongue, then looked at Venelana who had her face in her hands in shame and was crying lightly. Lilith said getting up and pouring them all a cup of tea with a slight magic hand, why were these reports with you? Graphia stiffened, then said I intercepted Serzich's package of them and found it unwise to provide him with it as his love for his sister would have caused problems. Venelana looked at Graphia then gave an appreciative nod, while Graphia earned a sinister smile from Lilith that froze her very good child, at least you haven't let go of your lucifuge instincts. Graphia just nodded not sure if she should feel insulted or happy. When there was another knock, she said come in, Belle. When Belle entered, she said while rolling along a trolley my lady, the time. Lilith sighed and said if you say so, Belle. Graphia you may leave to do your duties, aside from my orders, I need a written report every week. Graphia bowed as you wish, my lady. Lilith then turned to Belle you brought food for Venelana. Belle shook her head a attendant is bringing it. Yours is something you'll eat. Lilith sighed and nodded. Venelana gathered enough courage and asked are you alright, my lady? Lilith looked at her then replied giving a glance at a smiling Belle the person I consider a son was unhappy with me not eating for days on end, so when he fed me, Belle saw that as a signal to start fattening me up. Then Alana smiled a bit on hearing this, probably finding such a little things that seemed to ground Lilith to a level same as her. Rahab was just discharged from the hospital and was making his way to his room a level lower. He was thinking about what he had been told by Metatron. He didn't have the will to tell him that he was scared of the abyss, but more scared of the avenging form he had been shown. He walked to his room creating a small abyssal ball of energy in his hand. When he reached his room, he teleported to his abyss where he had stored Samuel's bracelets. He willed himself inside, finding his brother lying quietly listening to the birds chirping in the background. When he noticed Rahab, he raised his head. What's wrong? Why are you hurt? Rahab stayed quiet for a second, but said meekly Barakiel was angry because her daughter was put under a spell. Samuel looked in for a second, then said with anger laced in his voice, where is he now? Did Michael end his pay? Rahab cut him off. It wasn't his fault. He was in his rage form, he had little control. Samuel looked at him. Where was your avenging form? Rahab lowered his head. I am afraid of it. Samuel looked at him and said simply, fight me. You will feel pain, but you'll not suffer in reality. Rahab shook his head and was about to say something as he narrowly dodged a light spear. His wings covered his sides as a few dozen light spears formed a wall around him. Samuel looked at him and moved so fast as if he disappeared. He was a cherub once, he remembered his training. As he threw a volley of light spears, Rahab dodged with little difficulty. Samuel made a light spear and let some of his poisonous blood mix in it and threw it at Rahab. As the spear impacted the wall of interlocking spears, it broke through them, then went inside Rahab's gut as it broke through the abyss shield too. As Rahab screamed in agony, Samuel looked sorry but said, feel the agony, brother. Burn this unholy pain in your mind, because whatever comes, nothing will be as bad as it. You would have disintegrated by now in reality. Make use of your domain, embrace it. Like I have embraced such a poison in me. As Rahab screamed for a minute more, an abyssal rift opened beneath him, its shadowy tentacles pulling the spear through, and then started covering Rahab in an abyssal shroud. As Rahab's screaming subsided, he instinctively pulled out a glowing red-black sword out of the rift and aimed it at Samuel, who smirked. So this is your power, Rahab. Let the fight start. After an hour of clashing swords, Samuel got a hit again, leading the armor to dispel and Rahab to drop to his knees. See, that wasn't too hard, was it? Rahab looked at Samuel with a small amount of respect and nodded. Thank you, brother. Samuel waved him off. Now leave me in peace, I'm enjoying the life in this place. Rahab chuckled a bit and found himself in the abyss again. He teleported back to his room to find a panicked Gabriel, who on seeing him hugged him. Where did you go, brother? You're still injured. Rahab sat down and said, to right or wrong, sister. Don't worry, I'm fine. Gabriel looked at him in concern. What is the pain in your thoughts? Rahab cursed himself for being foolish in front of his sister. They said hesitantly, not knowing whether telling her the truth would be best. I went into my abyss, sister. It will be for the best if I'm not afraid of it. Gabriel sadly nodded, knowing he wasn't telling her everything. As soon as you feel ready, tell me. For now, there is a message from the devils. Raphael sent me to call you, he felt you should attend. Rahab looked hesitant but nodded. Very well. Let me wear my robes, I'll meet you outside. After a minute, Rahab exited his chambers to find Gabriel waiting. As they moved to the elevator, Rahab said, you shouldn't make it a habit of coming to the second heaven. It is below you, dear sister. Gabriel looked at him and said, clearly unhappy with his comment. It is below you too. But you insist on living here. Rahab replied as he pressed the button. I sinned once, Gabriel, I deserve this. Gabriel gave him a disapproving glare as they entered and said, Father forgave you. You should at least return to your old home. Rahab gave her a tired glance. I can't, it was a place for the Watchers, sister. Gabriel looked at him sadly and said, Father made the Watchers like what a human was capable of. You weren't made for the concept of perfectness, as our late brother called it. A few mistakes don't count. Rahab looked at her sadly and cupped her cheek. Never say that again, sister. Heaven won't be heaven if you start saying such stuff, dear sister. Gabriel looked down. I'm sorry, brother. I didn't mean to. Rahab patted her head. Don't apologize, sister. As they arrived, Gabriel led him to the conference room where they knocked and entered. Rahab found that Raphael, Uriel and Michael were already sitting. Michael seemed worried and said as soon as he saw Rahab, are you alright, brother? Rahab smiled weakly. I will be, brother. I'll need some time to get myself straight. Michael nodded, sighing in relief. As they sat down, Michael turned on the conference. As the holographic screen lit up, Asmodeus's face appeared. I see you're ready, Michael Dono. Michael nodded. I am. We needed time for Rahab to awaken. Asmodeus looked around till he saw Rahab sitting on the left corner with Gabriel on his right. Asmodeus bowed. A pleasure to see you in good health, Rahab Dono. We haven't met yet, I'm Falbium Asmodeus. Rahab slightly bowed. A pleasure. Uriel, who was the military commander of the Angels, asked, helping Rahab, who barely showed any signs of recognition. I find it surprising that you're talking to us. Normal, we're only contacted by Seraphol Leviathan, your foreign advisor. Might we ask why you, the military commander, is calling us? Uriel would have chuckled if he were not in the frame, as he saw Rahab straighten up at the corner of his eye. Falbium took a few seconds, but replied rather stiffly. Serafal is slightly wrapped up with family business. And instead of coming midway, I thought of taking care of this on my own. Rahab asked slightly out of his way. Might I ask why? I find it surprising. Serafal's and Serzich's sisters were recalled to heaven just before everyone practically exploded. Falbium shook his head as if Rahab had got him and replied, you would be correct in assuming one of the two was responsible for this fiasco. Raphael looked unimpressed and said rather directly, who? Falbium sighed loudly and faintly said, I haven't slept enough for this. Then he replied, Rias Gremory. She was released from interrogation just yesterday night. Michael took the lead, seeing the slightly narrowed eyes of Raphael and the disapproving look of Uriel. What were her reasons and actions? Falbium sat down as the camera lowered. Usage of the subjugation spell twice. And indirectly being responsible for a death of a boy who she later resurrected. Her reasons, I'm bound by devil law to not disclose. But it was not anywhere near war-related, it was her own selfishness. As Gabriel looked sad, Rahab asked, a bit irritated, I would expect her punishment to be lenient. There's no need for a youngling to be served so harsh a punishment that she lets go. Falbium stayed frozen, then said chuckling, that'll be the third time that you've saved her life, Rahab don't know. But then his voice deadened, but I can't say for sure, Lady Lilith has taken up her mantle again, and I'm not the one who could stand in her way. Rahab's eyes dropped as he nodded silently, very well. Falbium sighed, now for the end, I'm required by Lady Lilith to deliver Ria's apology. I hope you can overlook her fragile condition, as she had the meeting with the Grigori just before having this filmed. As the recording played, Rahab got up and whispered in Michael's ear, I'll take Gabriel out, there's no need for both of us to hear it. It'll just sadden Gabriel more. Michael gave a sad but approving smile and nodded. Rahab motioned Gabriel to follow him outside, which she did with some hesitation after seeing Ria's crying face. As they came outside and closed the door, Gabriel asked, why stop me from seeing? Rahab looked away, remembering how his father figuratively tortured Lilith. It's not my place to answer, and maybe I would never answer it. Gabriel looked at the pain in his heart and almost dragged him to a marketplace type area in heaven to try to make him feel better. Rahab, who was being unceremoniously pulled, asked, where are you taking me? Gabriel gave him a smile, to a coffee place, I'll be opening. Rahab sighed as he smiled at her elder sister's childishness. When they reached the shop, Gabriel let go and looked at him expectantly. Rahab sighed but smiled at the small board that was put up and the glass panes that showed its inside. It's cozy. I might just get a coffee to go every time I visit Azazil, if only to make him jealous. Gabriel gave him a disapproving look but smiled nonetheless. Rahab said as they decided to eat something at a nearby shop, I should probably visit the Wat Grigori before Azazil calls Michael himself. Gabriel gave an uncertain look. Should you? After the incident. Rahab patted her head, don't worry, I'll be alright. They are my friends. Gabriel just nodded with a little doubt. As the afternoon came, Bell knocked on Lilith's study and said, Lord Beelzebub and Miss Sona have arrived, my lady. Lilith, who was looking out the window, said, show Ajuka in, Bell. As they entered, Ajuka kneeled without knowing where Lilith was standing. Bell looked at her and asked, my lady. Lilith shut the window she was looking out of and walked back to her seat and motioned her to leave them alone. Lilith studied him, noticing his dress being slightly creased and worn. She asked rather politely, remembering that he hadn't been present yesterday due to already working on removing the spell, haven't you got enough sleep? Ajuka shook his head, I focused on finishing my work first, my lady. I hope my appearance doesn't anger you. Lilith poured him some tea and said, sit. A hard worker can be given such luxury. Ajuka took a glance at her stoic face but nodded nonetheless. As he sat and took a sip, Lilith asked, what is the status on the evil pieces? Ajuka placed a set of pieces in front of her. These are the masterpieces that the current ones in the King Tower will be replaced with. After that, every devil in the system will be recalled to the underworld to get his or hers remotely modified. All the ones not in the system will be brought back either by force or by negotiations. And some of the cases will be reopened for investigation. Lilith nodded, very well. Ask Falbium for more manpower if you need. Ajuka just nodded. Lilith looked at his internal struggle and said, what do you want to ask? Ajuka straightened up a bit and asked with a lowered head, what is to be done to Serzich's? Lilith stared a bit then replied, he's far too attached to his sister. If he does not decide whether he should cut some ties, the Lucifuge clan will annul the marriage and take custody of the child. Ajuka froze on hearing her declaration, then looked at her to see if she was bluffing, however unlikely it was. But when the declaration sank in, he just lowered his head and nodded and replied quietly, I'll pass on the warning, my lady. Lilith looked at him and asked, how close are you to be wondering about his endpoint while your own is undecided? Ajuka just sadly replied, we are brothers in all but blood, my lady. Lilith nodded, I'll leave you with the assignment of talking to the higher-ups of both the factions, telling them about the removal of the subjugation spell. Ajuka nodded, very well, my lady. Lilith nodded. Very well, you may leave. Ajuka stood up and asked hesitantly, my lady, with your permission might I look at the changes in Sona's evil pieces? A sudden power fluctuation has never happened, I find it unwise of her walking around with a piece that may affect her. Lilith nodded. You may take a look before we need to be left alone. Ajuka bowed. Thank you for your generosity, my lady. Meanwhile, Rahab was resting on the bed of his room. While there were many cons of living on the second heaven, he chose to ignore them. He laughed at himself, thinking how he once was an angel of pride. Supposedly the same as Lucifer when he was sent to hell as a demon representative of pride. He remembered how the angels had drifted away little by little after Lucifer's fall, resigning themselves to believe that he was too fated for such a thing. He had few he could call friends just a few months before the Watchers fell collectively. He knew Azazil thought that he tricked him into falling with him, but that was far from the truth. He knew that he was fated to fall shortly before, when his omnipotent father had cast him a wary glance, as if he had been shown his death warrant, and to be frank that meeting was what pushed the Watchers to be sure that the fall was the only choice. What the topic was of the meeting, he had long forgotten. But the wary look that Metatron had cast on him brought many bad memories to the surface of his mind, which were pushing him to stay away from others now. He sighed as he looked at the package that was left by Metatron, containing his armor. He opened it to find his armor repaired, but still showing the marks where the light sword had pierced through. It was traditional for the Watchers to keep their old armor, though they didn't wear it. Azazil had told him to wear it with pride for he had been forgiven. While the older angels had been warming up, he early found himself willing. Perhaps this was the curse that, Azrael always said, plagued the angels of death, but honestly he didn't know. His angel nature always told him that he was turning into a dragon, a species that his father had little trust in. Currently the transformation was a single cell a day, so it was a long time, but he had second thought several times a day. Sighing, he steeled himself and went to his abyss after wearing his armor, and then entered the dimensional void, the carrier of Dad and the current home of the son of Ensue. As he entered he was hit by an intoxicating aura of the son of Ensue. As he went ahead and looked for the creature inhabiting this void, he heard a sound. Baka read, "Get out." He drifted to the sound source to see an unusual and peculiar scene. Daughter of Dad in her human child form was hurling insults at the large dragon form of the son of Ensue. "Leave my home," Baka read. "Home stealer. Freeloader. Thief. Bastard. Fuck." Before she could finish, the dragon looked at her and said, "Stop. Do you even know what you are saying, Cthulhu? Anyway, don't you need to kill someone for entering here?" He ended as he looked at Rahab. Office didn't look at him and hurled a black mass hitting the dragon as she held her middle finger at the dragon. When she confirmed that the son of Ensue saw it, she turned to look at Rahab and acted as if she hadn't just acted the way she did and asked, "Why are you here, my son?" The son of Ensue stared at them both and said, clearly shocked, "Office, don't tell me you laid with that man." This earned him another bowl of the black mass that sent him back a bit. Rahab replied, choosing to ignore what the son of Ensue had said, "I wanted to visit you, I was unwell." The office looked him over, then said with a hint of worry in her emotionless voice, "You were impaled twice. Once with a poison that affects dragons, why?" Rahab nodded. "I feared the abyss, poison was the only way to make me embrace it." Office morphed into a girl in her 20s and ran her hand through his hair. "You should have asked. I would have helped, my son." Rahab just lowered his head a bit. "I didn't think troubling you with that would have been nice after you helped me stay alive, daughter of Dad." As the dragon heard him say her title, he growled, "Who are you, angel, for the Cthulhu to have told you that?" Office turned to the dragon and said with a smirk he already knew when I first visited him in his brine abyss. Rahab bowed a bit. "I apologize if my words offended you, son of Ensue." The dragon growled even louder this time. "I should kill you for saying that out loud. After all, after my creator left me, why should I be associated with him?" Rahab lowered his head and bowed. "I apologize, Great Red." The dragon cast him a glance, then he looked at Office. "Why did you save the angel, Cthulhu?" Office gave him a glance. "It was his reward for sharing his home with me for so long and staying silent, as I enjoy silence." Meanwhile with Sona, Ajuka had just done a basic check of her king piece to make sure that the excess power would be alright. Sona on the other hand was more worried about the person who she had been summoned by. When she was younger she had heard stories about the mother of devils and mostly they had filled her with dread along with every other person. She knew that she would most likely be punished as Rias had only moved into the Citri-controlled territory on her blessings. Sona's eyes wandered around the room in anxiety as Lady Lilith read the stack report one by one while writing down a few lines in a separate book. Sona noticed a huge portrait of the original Lucifer standing behind Lady Lilith, who was sitting on a royal chair in front of him with her side and back protected by the Lucifer's white leathery wings, behind the desk where Lady Lilith was sitting. She looked around to see the draperies of red and white with black trimmings and the aristocratic look the whole room had. Ajuka stood up and said, "Lady Lilith, I've finished. Her power will stabilize in a day or two, so she just has to rest her powers." Lilith looked up and nodded. "Very well, you may leave." I would expect the meeting to be scheduled tomorrow. Ajuka kneeled. Very well, my lady. I shall inform you of the meeting as soon as it is done. Lilith nodded. As Ajuka left and closed the door, Lilith's eyes locked onto Sona, who was fidgeting in anxiety. She began. Do you know why you were called here? Sona nodded hesitantly. I have an inkling, my lady. Lilith calmly said. Continue. Sona looked up at her a bit nervously, then took a deep breath to calm herself down, and said, I was also at fault for what happened. The territory belongs to the Citri clan. The Grimoire presence was due to my blessing with which she had partial control. Thus, I am responsible due to extension. Lilith looked at her for a second, then let out a smile that chilled her a bit. Smart girl. And do you feel the need for punishment? Sona replied as calm as she could be. If you so desire. Lilith looked at her and said, speak freely. What is your opinion about this? Sona sighed and said, unsure. I confirmed with my sister about why Rias would have done what she did. And what I guessed was correct. Rias was trying to make a strong peerage in desperation to defeat Riser Phoenix in a raiding game that could have decided her marriage. Lilith nodded and motioned her to sit in front of her as she went to her reports. And what about your wedding? How did you escape it? Sona said, unsure of herself being treated casually by one of the progenitor of her race. One put forth a challenge that if a person could beat me at chess and was a high-ranking devil of a good caliber, only then the person could marry me. Lilith grinned. Smart. And what about Rias? Do you believe she can win? Sona shook her head. No. It wouldn't be possible. Her peerage may have strong individuals, but they are not well trained in fighting in group battles against various enemies of different skills. She relies on brute force, which against a phoenix wouldn't work. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.